Welcome to the Himalayan Institute's campus here in Khajuraho, India. This campus is a true spiritual oasis, and it was established in 2012 as the inspiration for this campus came from a profound desire to revive the ancient spiritual tradition of Tantra and Yoga, for which Khajuraho was very famous thousands of years ago, but continued becoming more and more dormant. And it called us back to establish this beautiful campus and the Sri Vidya Shrine. Since 2012, this campus has really blossomed as with a magnetic pull to seekers who are interested in immersing themselves in tantric practice and group meditation. One of the other things which is so special about this campus is that it really gives you a feel and flavor for that aspect of India which predates the modern civilization. It's almost like you're stepping back in time hundreds of years. It's a very remote and rural part of India, surrounded by the Vindhya mountain range and the vast forests of central India, which over time have largely been deforested and depleted. This campus itself was once part of these great forests of central India. And as you can see around you, there are very few trees left. When we came to this campus in 2009, 2010, when we began developing this project, there were very, very few trees. And in fact, the land itself had been lying fallow for many, many years, if not decades. This area does have some degree of agriculture undertaken, but it's a very drought-prone area. The soil is relatively poor quality. So the land that we're seeing right behind us was largely fallow. But when people do cultivate crops here, there are crops like wheat, barley, mustard. Some of these crops are relatively well suited for this kind of climate, but many of them really aren't. Wheat is very, very water intensive. So when we came here, initially the focus was simply on developing the campus. You can't see, but there's a building and our shrine behind the tree line. And we also did some agriculture on this land, growing barley, wheat, chickpea, mustard, sesame. But as we became more and more rooted in this community and we began to explore what was happening here, it was very clear that this region is really representative of what's happening across a much broader swath of India and the world, and that climate change is bringing a very, very profound transformation and challenges to the agricultural way of life. The crops that people had been growing, and that even we grew on this land, really don't work anymore. Changing rain patterns make it very, very difficult to grow these crops. Every drop of water is precious. One of the projects that the Institute undertakes is distribution of clean drinking water to the nearby villages. So it felt completely out of touch then for us to do flood irrigation and wastewater growing a very, very inefficient crop like wheat. So we began reflecting on what we could do to bring a more sustainable form of agriculture that can use water more efficiently and actually regenerate the soil. And that led us to really reflect on a number of different technologies, new options to travel throughout India and see what might work here and establish a pilot project to showcase new methodologies for sustainable and regenerative agriculture. And that's what inspired us to bring dates and dragon fruits, which you see behind us here, and to plant them here. These crops are very new to this region, in spite of the fact that the word Khajuraho means land of the dates. Khajur is the Hindi word for date. And yet, all you see are wild dates, which are beautiful, but really don't give you any actual dates. So we needed to figure out how to reintroduce species of dates that would actually produce fruits, which could be a very, very valuable cash crop to farmers who are struggling to make a livelihood. Let's go check out the farm and so you can see exactly through your own eyes what we've been working on for the last several years. This is dragon fruit. It's a form of cactus, as you can see here. And obviously, as we know about all cactuses, they're very, very well suited for dry conditions. So dragon fruit is grown from cuttings. A small snippet of a portion of dragon fruit is rooted in a nursery and then transplanted, and one dragon fruit is on each face of this concrete pillar. The concrete pillar is to help provide support for the dragon fruit to climb up. So you see that we're using just some gentle cloth to tie it around, and slowly, slowly it grows up. And the ring on top here is to train the dragon fruit to come up, and then we drape it over. As the dragon fruit keeps growing, more and more shoots come out from a number of points. And we prune off a number of the lower shoots to encourage the growth up. But then once it comes to the top, we encourage many, many, many shoots to come. And in the next year and years, it'll kind of blossom and mushroom out, and the fruits will hang off this top canopy. Dragon fruit is a fruit that many of us overseas in America and other parts of the world might not be familiar with, but it's an up-and-coming superfruit. It's it's a rich source of a number of antioxidants, a number of minerals, very, very good for your health. And it's very well suited for these dry land conditions. It's a crop that essentially is a perennial. It'll be planted here, it'll keep regenerating, and for many years, if not decades, it'll be able to keep giving fruit. It requires a very minimal amount of water. Down below, there are these black hose pipes. This is drip irrigation or micro irrigation. Instead of flooding this with pouring water on, you just simply allow, there's a series of pipes and valves, and small amount of water runs through these black pipes and drips at the base of this column, and then goes into where the roots of the dragon fruit are. So just a few gallons of water is enough to provide whatever nourishment is needed for this dragon fruit per week. And that's really only during the hotter, drier part of the year. Other times, it can just get natural moisture. So it's 20, 30, maybe even 50 times more water efficient than a more conventional crop like wheat. So it's a beautiful example of how you can introduce a crop that had never no one had thought about, but is very, very suited to this environment as a form of a cash crop. These fruits that are going to grow on this will be brought to market. They can be sold locally. They can be exported to other parts of India. And not only are they a cash crop, they also provide a very, very valuable form of nutrition. They're often sold in a more medicinal context or a nutritive context in India. So it's a wonderful addition to the community in this area. We started off with small cuttings, just about this large, planted at the base. That was about a year ago. And the cuttings grow well during the warm part of the year, and then they kind of go into dormancy in the cold part of the year. So throughout the year, they kept growing, 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 and here we are about 15 months later, seeing where they're draping over the top of the tree. So the first year really goes into growth, and in the second year, they'll continue to grow, and then they'll start being fruits that come off of various pores. So about 8 or 9 months from now, we'll start seeing our first fruits. So the second year of growth is when you see the fruits, and then thereafter, we'll get fruits every year. Most likely one time a year, but again, we're actually adapting a new crop, so it's possible that we might even get fruits twice a year. Like any new introduction, there always are challenges. One of the interesting challenges that we faced is that the intense summer heat and the quality of the light was so strong in May, June in particular, but even a little bit before and after, that it actually scorched the dragon fruit. And it led to the dragon fruit being weak enough that fungus and other diseases can infiltrate. So it led us to understand that we need to protect the dragon fruit in that hottest time of the year with some shade net covering or potentially a little bit of additional moisture. One of the things that we're going to use to do that is to try to bring some water that drips along the column. You can even see here small roots coming off of the dragon fruit as it's growing up. So a little bit of moisture on the column will help during that intense dry part of the year. Also, we can use a thin green plastic shade net, which probably cuts about 50% of the solar intensity of the light and the radiation, the solar strength, so that it doesn't scorch it. But ultimately, the key to actually protecting these is bringing a shade canopy. Now that takes many years to grow. The dates that are planted on all sides of these dragon fruit columns in about 5 to 7 years will provide that critically needed shade. So we'll just have to provide some supplemental shade for the first few years. We're also growing other crops like this bushy, with like this bush here, which is actually tur dal, or known as pigeon pea, which is a perennial that can shade it from the sides. So there's a number of different techniques using natural methods as well as some supplemental shade that can support this. There are many, many other potential issues. There could be pestilence, there could be fungus, there could be root rot. Luckily, we've been quite lucky because we already knew that we don't need to overwater it. We need to simply manage it the way it is. And this area is very, very natural. There's a good balance of natural bugs and critters and things that actually keep the other bugs and critters who might be harming this in check. So having a balanced ecosystem is a key part of regenerative farming, where the soil and the surrounding environment all support each other and whatever you plant in that environment. And that's a key part of what we're doing here. Let's take a look at the dates which surround all of these dragon fruits. This is a date seedling. It'll grow into a tree which will produce fruits that are then dried into what we eat as dates. Dates are extraordinary tree species. There's so much about them. So let's start from the beginning. Dates are native to a number of parts of the world that are very, very dry, like the Middle East, like North Africa in particular. These dates are a species, or a variety known as barahi, which originally comes from Iran and surrounding areas. And it'll produce a golden yellow or greenish colored date. Dates are highly water efficient. They grow in the desert. And this environment is actually known as a desert jungle. It gets a very, very limited amount of rain, and most of the year it's quite dry. So we selected these particular varieties because we worked with a number of technical research institutes, and they said that the conditions here are very, very well suited for this barahi variety and about 4 or 5 others that are also present on this farm. One of the unique things about date is that there's a huge range of productivity, of different, of variability in dates in the wild, which makes it very, very challenging to domesticate and cultivate as a crop that can support farmer livelihood. One of the goals of this project is to help showcase and demonstrate that it's possible for local farmers to grow dates as a form of their livelihood. That agriculture can not only support the environment, be more water efficient, regenerate the soil, but also help people take care of their families and be a form of livelihood that they can really count on. This area is still a very, very impoverished region, and farmers are struggling to find a way that agriculture can really support them and help them move forward. So looking at how in nature, only a small fraction, a small percentage of dates actually produce date fruits, which is quite counterintuitive. Not all date trees will actually produce the fruit in nature. So research institutes found the best varieties that actually have good yield, have good quality fruit, and isolated those, and then worked to develop technologies so that they could use tissue culture means to propagate that and have a consistent seedling that farmers can plant and then rely on, because it takes many years to turn a seedling into a tree that can produce dates. So imagine as a farmer, you take all the time and money and energy, you utilize your precious, scarce farmland to grow trees, and then 5 or 7 years later to realize that they're not even going to produce any fruit. That would be devastating. In fact, the truth is, no one would even ever start. This has already been proven that these species will produce dates in a good yield, in a high quality way. Now we need to demonstrate that for these local farmers because they don't fully believe it yet. We've had the luxury and privilege to travel to these research institutes, to plantations in Gujarat and Western India to see it through our own eyes, and now we need to show them. So this seedling began as a small seedling, about this big, maybe about 8 inches tall, that had about 3 or 4 very, very delicate, spindly looking leaves. And it's remarkable to think that within 15 months, that delicate 3 or 4 leafed seedling has grown into this. It's about 2 feet tall, very bushy, And the leaves, which were once very, very soft and very, very prone to being eaten by rats and other creatures, we actually had to protect it by putting a little protective cage around it. Here, just a little over a year later, the tips are very, very sharp, they're pointy, and no predators will be able to eat this. So it's a crop that is very, very well suited to an area where there are antelope, known as nilgai, who can come in to graze. There are hare, there are rats, other creatures who might normally disturb a crop. Monkeys, creatures aren't going to be able to damage this. This is, again, about 15 months old. It'll take about 3 to 4 years before this produces the first fruits. And by then it'll be probably about 6 to 8 feet tall. And it'll continue growing for about another 6 years or so, and it'll reach its maturity in the 12th year, and it'll have a beautiful canopy. So imagine a palm tree, essentially, that has a canopy about 15, 20, maybe even 25 feet high. The lower portions of the canopy have already been pruned, so you get that iconic date trunk, and then that beautiful canopy that spreads out. And it spreads out like an umbrella, and then bunches of dates are falling from there. It's just a gorgeous view. And that's what you'll see across this whole vista. These dates are planted very, very widely spaced, because right now, even though they look very small, and it's almost difficult to see where they are because there's so much room, in 5 or 10 years, they'll actually, all the canopies will touch, and the whole area will be under that umbrella of date palm leaves. They're spaced 8 meters apart, which is about 26 feet apart. Quite a bit of room, which is why between 2 dates, that 26 feet, we have 2 columns which support the dragon fruit. And the canopy will spread over it and provide the shade that the dragon fruit needs. To provide the irrigation that the date needs, we're using a technology called drip irrigation or micro irrigation, which is perfect because date needs just a small amount of water just at its root base area to give it the critical resources it needs to get established. Just a gallon or 2 of water a week, and in the wintertime, even less than that, is needed to not just allow this to survive, but really to thrive. For the first 2 or 3 years, most of the energy goes into producing a very, very strong root ball. So you won't see as much growth. In fact, this is still quite remarkable amount of vegetative growth in the first 15 months if it started with literally 3 leaves. But as much as you're seeing above, as much or more is happening below. And the rule of thumb is that the diameter of the canopy is roughly about the diameter of the root base underneath. As that canopy expands, the roots will go quite far and somewhat deep as well. It's able to get all the water it needs really from the soil, and we just provide this drip irrigation to further strengthen, and in particular also to show farmers that that little bit of extra water will allow you to optimize the yield so that they can really get a very, very sustainable form of income from this. One of the other unique things about this drip irrigation is that you can mix in liquid organic fertilizers into the tank and then bring that through a pump into these lines. So you're providing not just water, but also supplemental nutrition and soil amendments that help the microbiome in the soil to actually make it more resilient to things like fungus and pests and other things like that. So it's a very, very natural and symbiotic way of supporting the growth of the tree. These trees will be blossoming over the months and years to come. And even though it takes a number of years for fruit to develop, there are ways to actually support income generation in those initial 3 or 4 years. And that's part of what makes this project so intriguing and so innovative. It's a form of multi-canopy sustainable agriculture where you intercrop or intersperse different type of plants that can grow at different heights and also yield at different times. So the date is the species that'll take the longest amount of time to grow and be the largest. Under that canopy then will be the dragon fruit, which will pretty much be at the height that they are now, so about 6 feet or so, and they'll drape over. And then below that, in between these rows, are a number of other crops which are seasonal crops. So just as the dates are spaced 26 feet tree to tree, The rows are also 26 feet row to row, which is a lot of area. So as you can see behind me, there's this vast space of green ground cover. This isn't just weeds. This is chickpea, and the chickpea is one of the most versatile crops in Indian cuisine and really throughout this part of Asia and now worldwide. It's a beautiful ground cover. It grows in about 4 months or so. You'll be able to harvest that chickpea bean, which can be used in a number of different ways. That's just one thing you can do. There's space for about 3 or 4 beds in between these rows. So other things that we're experimenting with in these rows are ginger and turmeric, and those are great examples of a crop that grows in about 9 months as a cash crop. We're also experimenting with vegetables like radish, spinach greens. I see some carrots and string beans right on the other side here. So you can do a number of different things. And again, using a similar form of drip irrigation so that you don't waste water. You do it in a very efficient way. And it provides a ground cover that protects the soil. After you harvest the beans or whatever it is, you can simply till it under and it'll become a form of organic fertilizer for the soil. So a 3-tier canopy from dates to dragon fruit to vegetables or bean species is a way to use all of the land sustainably. And in the early years, you start with getting some income from your annual crops like the beans and vegetables. By the second year, you get dragon fruit. And by the 4th year, you start getting dates, and the date yield increases all the way to the 12th year, by which point the shade from the dates kind of crowds out everything else, but you get more than enough income for you to support yourself, and the rest of the land is just under a beautiful umbrella of that date, and you can walk through these wide avenues and enjoy the view. Here we are at our campus well. When we think of a well in America, we might not even know what to think of. It's an underground place where our water comes from. But here, a well is a masterpiece. It's a work of art. This is a very special kind of traditional well. Large, so it's about 25 feet in diameter and 50 or 60 feet deep. And it was dug initially by hand, and then machines dug it further. Once rock was hit, a little bit of blasting and further machines. Because in this area, water is very, very scarce and hard to find. So a hand-dug, large-size well is the only way to ensure that you're going to find those underground water channels that can actually fill a well and give you the water that you need. So water is very, very precious, very scarce in this area. When we came to campus, we realized this. And we wanted to understand what are ways that we can help recharge the groundwater, and we can make the best use of whatever scarce resources there are, and find a way that we replenish more than we take out. And what emerged from that was what's known as rainwater harvesting. How you can take the amount of rainfall that comes sporadically, through certain times of the year, and then very, very intensely in a small portion of the year from July to September. And rather than have it run off the soil, especially when land is somewhat degraded and deforested, it just runs off and kind of disappears, but rather have it soak into the ground. So there are hills all around this campus where the rainwater flows down. At the base of those hills, we made channels, and we directed those channels into our primary, what are called nalas, ravines, seasonal streams. And once they came into those nalas, we found the appropriate point where multiple nalas were intersecting, and we dug a pond there and made an earth berm. So it's like a farm pond that you might have in America or Europe. And these farm ponds are fed by these seasonal rains and seasonal water channels, and they allow a lot of water to collect and then settle into the ground. So the well is full often in the rainy season, but the goal actually isn't to have the water full at the pond level, but rather to have it go down. So having it only partially full is wonderful because it means that the water is actually going into the ground. The pond that we dug is several hundred yards from here. And yet this well, after we dug that pond, the water level rose 10 or 20 feet because the water goes into the ground and then comes back up through this well. It's really remarkable to see this in action. So this well is the primary water source for drinking water, as well as for irrigating the dates and the dragon fruits and all the other crops that are here. So it's a very, very important source of life. Similarly, on the Institute's neighboring community center land, we have another well, even larger and deeper than this, which is used to support the dates and dragon fruits there, but also as the water source to fill the tankers, which then travel to the nearby villages to distribute clean drinking water. In the months of April, May, June into July, there's a critical shortage of drinking water because all of the other more shallow, smaller wells dry up. So we bring water from this very deep and wide well to the villagers and then distribute that across the area. You hear the bell going off. This is our evening prayer time.